Chapter 17. Jake's story some weeks before the southern lands, sunny, very little wind, and even warm temperature, 2:33 p.m. Jake's adventure took him through the warm, welcoming southern gate. He found himself by the second day walking through a very neat and tidy landscape. It consisted of little, soft, green and very rounded hills that looked as if they were made of very squishy marshmallow. As Jake walked, he noticed that nearly all the trees he was now passing by had been cut into shapes. Sometimes they were severe, such as pyramids and cubes and spirals, and sometimes they were silly and fanciful, such as peacocks and bears and teacups. It was as if the whole of the surrounding landscape had been brushed and trimmed and swept and painted and manicured. The houses Jake passed on his travels all seemed very rarefied too. Palaces were scattered here and there and were even grander than the houses. Strange place for an adventure, he thought. Why, I've only got to run a little bit too hard or stretch out my arms a little bit too wide, and I could end up breaking a house down or messing up a whole garden full of those spindly looking trees. And he shook his head. Here's a picture of him. He did wonder sometimes at the sprites and story devisers and the wicked little games they liked to play. Just to be sure, he checked the story bureau letter in his travel satchel. There it was in the familiar black ink of the bureau scribes. Dear adventurer, you should aim to arrive at the royal palace in the late afternoon where you will be expected and will be known as Prince Charming. At the palace you will be given appropriate clothing for a grand prince, and your other duties will be then made known to you. Yours sincerely, etc. Must be the place then, all right, he said to himself, and carried on down the road. The Grand Royal Palace, 4:59 p.m. Jake marched straight up to the front door of the huge royal palace. He was indeed expected and was led at once to a fine chamber. Fresh clothes, fit for such a charming prince, were laid out on an enormous four-poster bed. A very thin man with white hair and dressed in black clothes showed him everything, exclaiming as he did with such great solemnity and with a sinister glint in his eyes. "Look at this velvet and ermine," he hissed, "this silk and satin, so lovely and fitting for such a prince, my liege." Jake was obliged to rummage through all the offered clothes and choose an outfit. "Sire," the servant said, bowing low, "it is felt that a ball should be held to celebrate our Prince Charming's birthday, and to that end I have drafted this invitation." He handed a roll of parchment to the prince. As Jake took it from the servant, their fingers touched for an instant, and Jake felt a strange all-over chill envelop him. "His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Queen invite you to a masked ball to celebrate the birthday of the noble Prince Charming. At the Royal Palace, food and fireworks, carriages long after midnight." "Very well," said Jake. "That seems clear enough." The sinister servant appeared delighted. He whisked the parchment away to arrange for its immediate distribution. All Jake really wanted to do was have a proper adventure. He was much more a man of action than this silk-wearing fop. He didn't enjoy the clothes he had to wear. They were a far cry from his normal, rough adventurer's tunics and cloaks, which he liked all hung about with shields and weapons. These silks and satins tended to ride up, and the silk stockings twisted themselves all around his beefy legs, and the shoes had little heels like some silly little girl's shoes. Tottering about on them would be no fun either. Next it's chapter 18.